The dust-stained window of the Pinecrest Hotel offered Katherine Porter a blurred view of the one-street town she'd come to call home over the past 2 years. But this morning, she stared at her own reflection instead. Her green eyes were rimmed with red, her chestnut hair hanging loose around shoulders that trembled with the weight of what had happened last night. She'd known Vernon was a gambler when she married him at 19, but she never thought he'd wager away the only thing that wasn't his to bet her. Katherine's hands shook as she fastened the last button on her dress. The memory of Vernon's drunken voice echoing through the saloon still rang in her ears. "I'll put my wife on the table," he had slurred, cards clutched in his sweaty palms. "She's worth more than gold. Pretty thing, obedient too." The laughter that followed from the other men at the poker table had cut through her like a knife as she stood frozen by the bar, a tray of empty glasses in her hands. Willowbrook, Colorado, 1875. That's where Katherine's dreams had died, in a town that had sprung up 10 years earlier when silver was discovered in the nearby mountains. Now the mines were drying up, and so were the hopes of many who had come seeking fortune. Katherine gathered her few possessions into a small carpet bag, a hairbrush, a faded photograph of her parents, a thin book of poetry, and the meager savings she'd managed to hide from Vernon. $32.16. Not much to start a new life, but staying meant accepting a fate worse than poverty. Vernon had lost the game. Lost it to Charles Blackburn, the owner of the Silver Star Saloon, a man known for his cruel treatment of women and his ruthless business practices. The saloon owner had leered at her across the room, his eyes traveling slowly down her body as he collected his winnings. "I'll be collecting you tomorrow, Mrs. Porter," he had called out to her. "A debt's a debt." Vernon had passed out at the table, too drunk to defend even his own despicable wager. Not that he would have. Their marriage had become nothing but a convenience for him. She worked as a barmaid at the hotel, bringing in the only steady income while he drank and gambled it away. A soft knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. "Who is it?" she called, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's Rose, dearie. Let me in, quick." Katherine unlocked the door to reveal the hotel cook, a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands. "You're leaving?" Rose asked, eyeing the carpet bag. "I have to. You know what happened last night." Rose nodded grimly. "Whole town's talking about it. Vernon's still passed out in the saloon, but Blackburn's already asking where you are." Katherine's blood ran cold. "I was hoping to be gone before anyone noticed." "That's why I'm here." Rose pulled a folded paper from her pocket. "My brother runs a stage station 30 miles west of here. This note tells him to help you, give you shelter until you figure things out. Rose, I can't thank you enough. No time for that. Blackburn's men are checking the stables. You won't get far on the stage. Then how? There's a cattle drive heading north. Foreman's name is Rusty Paxton. He's a good man, stops here whenever they're moving herds through. His camp's just beyond the ridge. If you hurry cross-country, you can reach them before they move out at noon." Katherine grabbed Rose's hands. "Why are you helping me?" The older woman's eyes misted. "Because 20 years ago, I was you. Only difference is, I had nowhere to run." She pressed a small pouch into Katherine's hand. "A little extra money. Now go, out the back way." The morning air was cool against Katherine's face as she hurried along the edge of town, keeping to the shadows of the buildings. Her heart hammered in her chest each time a door opened or a horse whinnied nearby. The dress she wore her best one, a blue calico with tiny white flowers, was hardly suited for cross-country travel, but there had been no time to change into something more practical. Once past the last building, she lifted her skirts and ran toward the ridge Rose had mentioned. The terrain was rocky, dotted with scrubby juniper and sage. Her thin-soled boots, designed for working indoors, provided little protection against the sharp stones, but fear pushed her forward. As she crested the ridge, the sight of the cattle drive spread out below her brought a surge of hope. Hundreds of longhorn cattle grazed in the valley, their massive horns glinting in the morning sun. Cowboys on horseback circled the herd, while several wagons were positioned near a creek that cut through the valley. Katherine made her way down the slope, her legs trembling with exhaustion and nerves. What would she say to this Rusty Paxton? Would he believe her story? Would he help her, or would he return her to town, to the man who now claimed to own her through a game of cards? As she approached the camp, a tall cowboy riding a chestnut mare noticed her and changed direction, heading toward her at a trot. Katherine stopped, smoothing her skirts and trying to calm her breathing. The rider pulled up a few feet away, tipping his hat back to reveal a sun-weathered face with keen blue eyes that assessed her quickly. He couldn't have been more than 30, with sandy hair that curled slightly where it emerged beneath his hat. "Morning, madam," he said, his voice deep but gentle. "You're a fair piece from town, something I can help you with," Katherine swallowed hard. "I'm looking for Mr. Rusty Paxton. Are you him?" A slight smile touched his lips. "That's me, and you are Katherine Porter, Mrs. Katherine Porter." She straightened her shoulders. "Rose from the hotel sent me. She said you might be able to help me." Rusty dismounted in one fluid motion, leading his horse closer. Up close, he was even taller than she'd first thought, towering over her 5'4" frame. "Rose is good people," he said. "What kind of help are you needing, Mrs. Porter?" The directness of his gaze made lying impossible. "I need to leave Willowbrook, immediately, and I can't take the stage." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Trouble, my husband?" She faltered, shame washing over her. "My husband lost a poker game last night. He wagered me. He lost." Rusty's expression hardened, his jaw clenching visibly. "He wagered you, like property?" Katherine nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "To Charles Blackburn. He owns the Silver Star." "I know Blackburn," Rusty said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "The man's poison. He expects to collect. Today, I have to get away before he finds me." Rusty was silent for a long moment, and Katherine feared he would refuse. Then he turned toward the camp. "Come on. We need to talk to the trail boss." Relief flooded through her as she followed him toward the wagons. "I can pay," she said quickly. "I have some money, and I can work, I can cook, so whatever's needed." "We'll sort that out," he said over his shoulder. "First things first." The camp was a hive of activity as men prepared for the day's drive. Several looked up curiously as Rusty led Katherine toward a wagon where an older man sat drinking coffee. "Frank," Rusty called. "Got a situation here." The older man, Frank, squinted at Katherine, then at Rusty. "This doesn't look like supplies from town. This is Mrs. Porter. She needs safe passage away from Willowbrook." Frank set down his coffee cup. "What kind of trouble, madam?" Before Katherine could answer, shouts erupted from the direction of the ridge. 3 riders appeared, galloping toward the camp. "That's Blackburn and his men," Katherine whispered, panic rising in her throat. Rusty's hand went to the revolver at his hip. "Frank, get Mrs. Porter to the chuck wagon. Keep her out of sight." Frank quickly ushered Katherine toward a large wagon, helping her climb inside. "Stay down," he instructed. Before stepping back out from her hiding place, Katherine could hear the approaching horses and the voices of men. She peered through a crack between the wagon boards, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it would give her away. Blackburn and his 2 companions pulled their horses to a stop before Rusty and Frank. Blackburn was a large man with a thick black beard and small, cruel eyes. He wore an expensive suit, incongruous with the dusty surroundings. "Paxton," Blackburn called, not bothering to dismount. "We're looking for a woman. Young, pretty brown hair. Seen anyone like that?" "Might have," Rusty replied, his stance casual but his hand still resting near his gun. "What's your business with her?" Blackburn's laugh was harsh. "She's my property. Won her fair and square last night from that fool Vernon Porter." "A woman's not property, Blackburn. When her husband puts her up as a wager, she is. Now I know she came this way." "Hand her over and we'll be on our way." Rusty shook his head slowly. "No woman here fitting that description. You might want to check back in town." One of Blackburn's men leaned forward in his saddle. "Boss, look there." He pointed toward the wagon where Katherine hid. Fresh footprints heading that way. Blackburn smiled, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Search the wagons," he ordered his men. "No," Rusty said, his voice hardening. "You've got no authority here, Blackburn. This is a legal cattle drive with legal papers. You want to search anything, you bring a marshal." The tension in the air thickened as cowboys began to gather around, some with hands on their weapons. Blackburn's eyes narrowed. "You harboring her, Paxton. That makes you a thief." "Can't steal what no one rightfully owns," Rusty replied evenly. "A woman isn't a horse or a watch or a bag of coins. She's not yours to claim." "Her husband says different. Then her husband's as wrong as you are." Blackburn's face darkened with anger. "I don't take kindly to being called wrong, Paxton, or being cheated out of what's mine." "Nothing here is yours, Blackburn," Frank interjected, stepping forward. "Now, we've got a herd to move and a schedule to keep. I suggest you ride back to town." Blackburn looked around at the growing number of cowboys watching the confrontation, clearly calculating his odds. Finally, he spat on the ground. "This isn't over, Paxton, not by a long shot." He jerked his horse around. "Let's go, boys. We'll catch up with Mrs. Porter another time." Katherine held her breath until the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance. Only then did she emerge from her hiding place, trembling with fear and relief. Rusty approached the wagon, offering his hand to help her down. "You all right, Mrs. Porter?" she nodded, unable to trust her voice. "He'll be back," Frank said grimly. "Maybe with more men." "I know," Rusty replied. "Which is why we need to move out now." He turned to Katherine. "Mrs. Porter, I can't in good conscience send you back to town, but traveling with a cattle drive isn't easy, especially for a woman." "I'm stronger than I look," Katherine said, finding her voice, "and I'm not afraid of hard work." Rusty studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, we're headed to the railhead at Clearwater Station. That's 3 weeks' journey. From there, you can take a train wherever you want to go." "Thank you," Katherine whispered, tears of gratitude welling in her eyes. "I'll repay your kindness, I promise. You can start by helping Cookie with the meals," Frank said, not unkindly. "Can you cook?" "Yes, sir. I worked in the hotel kitchen before becoming a barmaid." "Good. Cookie can use the help." Frank turned to Rusty. "Get her settled in the chuck wagon. I want to be moving in 30 minutes. As Rusty led her toward a different wagon, Katherine felt a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration. She was leaving behind everything familiar, heading into an uncertain future with strangers. But for the first time in years, she was making her own choice. "Mr. Paxton," she said softly, "thank you for standing up to Blackburn. Not many would have done that." Rusty's expression was unreadable as he helped her onto the wagon seat. "You're no one's wager, Mrs. Porter. No one has the right to claim ownership of another person." "Please call me Katherine." A small smile touched his lips. "Katherine, then, and I'm Rusty to everyone except my mother, who insists on calling me Russell." For the first time that day, Katherine felt herself smile in return. "Rusty it is, then." Within the hour, the massive herd was moving, a slow-motion river of horns and hide flowing northward across the prairie. Katherine sat beside Cookie, an elderly man with a weathered face and kind eyes, learning the routines of the chuck wagon as they rolled along at the rear of the drive. By nightfall, her arms ached from kneading biscuit dough and stirring massive pots of beans. Her feet were blistered from walking alongside the wagon when the terrain grew too rough to ride, and her face felt burned from the relentless sun. But there was a newfound peace in her heart, a feeling of safety she hadn't experienced in a long time. As the cowboys gathered around the campfire after supper, Katherine found herself watching Rusty. Unlike the other men who joked and told stories, he sat somewhat apart, his attention seemingly focused on cleaning his revolver. There was something in his quiet demeanor that spoke of deep waters, of a man who kept his own counsel. "He's a good man," Cookie said, noticing the direction of her gaze. "Been working cattle drives since he was 16. Started as a wrangler, worked his way up. The men respect him." "He risked a lot for me today," Katherine said softly. "Blackburn is a dangerous man," Cookie nodded. Rusty's faced worse than the likes of Blackburn. He was in the war, came back different like many did. Doesn't talk about it, but you can see it in his eyes sometimes. Katherine understood that well enough. She had her own ghosts, her own silences. Across the fire, Rusty looked up suddenly, catching her gaze. For a moment, something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. Then he nodded slightly and returned to his task. That night, sleeping on a bedroll beneath the vast, star-filled sky, Katherine dreamed not of the past she was fleeing, but of the unknown future stretching before her like the endless prairie. And for the first time in years, that future held a glimmer of hope. The cattle drive fell into a rhythm over the next few days. Up before dawn, coffee and breakfast ready by first light, then the slow, dusty progress northward. Katherine quickly proved her worth around the chuck wagon, taking on more responsibilities, as Cookie taught her the tricks of cooking for 20 hungry men with limited supplies and equipment. On the fourth day, as they made camp near a small creek, Rusty approached her as she scrubbed pots in the shallow water. "How are you holding up?" he asked, crouching beside her. Katherine pushed a strand of hair from her face, leaving a smudge of dirt on her cheek. "Better than I expected." "Cookie says I'm a natural at camp cooking. High praise from that old grumbler." Rusty smiled, a rare sight that transformed his serious face. "But I meant, how are you really doing? This isn't an easy life, especially coming from town comforts." Katherine set down the pot she was scrubbing. "Truthfully, I've never worked harder in my life. Everything aches, I'm filthy from dust, and I haven't had a proper bath in days." She looked up at him, her green eyes clear and direct. "And I wouldn't trade it for anything. I feel free." Rusty nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Freedom's worth the hardships." "Yes," she agreed softly. "It is." He seemed about to say more when shouts erupted from the direction of the herd. One of the cowboys was galloping toward camp, waving his hat frantically. "Stampede," he yelled. The herd spooked. Rusty was on his feet instantly, running toward his horse. Katherine watched in horror as in the distance, the previously placid herd began to move as one massive entity, gaining speed like a locomotive. "Get to the wagon," Cookie shouted at her, already gathering his precious cooking equipment. "Hold tight to something." Katherine scrambled up the bank, racing toward the chuck wagon as chaos erupted around her. Cowboys mounted in a frenzy, spurring their horses toward the leading edge of the stampeding cattle. The ground began to tremble beneath her feet as the thunder of thousands of hooves grew closer. She had almost reached the wagon when she tripped on a rock hidden in the tall grass, falling hard. Pain shot through her ankle as she tried to stand. Looking up in terror, she saw the leading edge of the herd changing direction, veering toward the camp. Suddenly, Rusty was there, his horse sliding to a stop beside her. Without a word, he leaned down, grasped her arm, and swung her up behind him in one powerful motion. "Hold on." He shouted above the roar of the cattle. Katherine wrapped her arms around his waist as he spurred the horse forward, racing parallel to the stampede. She could feel the heat radiating from the cattle, smell the dust and fear rolling off them in waves. Rusty guided his horse with expert precision, gradually angling away from the herd toward higher ground. Only when they reached the safety of a rocky outcropping did he slow, turning to check on Katherine. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. "My ankle," she managed, her heart still pounding from the narrow escape. "I think I twisted it when I fell." He helped her dismount carefully, supporting her weight as she tested her injured foot. The pain made her wince. "Let me look at it," he said, guiding her to sit on a flat rock. His hands were surprisingly gentle as he removed her boot and examined her ankle, which was already beginning to swell. "Not broken, I think, but a bad sprain." Katherine looked back toward the camp, now hidden by a cloud of dust. "The others, will they be all right? Frank's a good trail boss." "They'll get the herd under control." Rusty removed his bandana and soaked it in water from his canteen. "This will help with the swelling." As he wrapped the cool cloth around her ankle, their eyes met. Something shifted between them in that moment, a barrier falling, a connection deepening. "Thank you," Katherine said softly. "You seem to be making a habit of rescuing me." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Maybe you're worth rescuing." The simple words warmed her more than they should have. For a moment, neither spoke, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Then Rusty cleared his throat, breaking the spell. "We should get back once the herd's settled. You'll need to rest that ankle." By the time they returned to camp, the Cowboys had managed to turn the stampede, preventing major losses. The camp itself was somewhat trampled, but the wagons had been moved to safety in time. Cookie fussed over Katherine's injury, insisting she rest while he prepared a poultice of herbs from his mysterious medical kit. That night, as Katherine lay on her bedroll, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion, she found herself reflecting on the events that had brought her here. Just days ago, she had been a barmaid in a small town hotel, trapped in a loveless marriage to a gambler. Now she was traveling with a cattle drive, fleeing a man who thought he owned her, and finding herself increasingly drawn to a cowboy whose quiet strength both intrigued and comforted her. Across the dying campfire, Rusty sat on watch, his silhouette etched against the star-filled sky. As if sensing her gaze, he turned slightly, the embers casting a warm glow on his face. He nodded once, a silent acknowledgement, before returning his attention to the darkness surrounding the camp. Katherine fell asleep with that image in her mind, and for the first time in years, her dreams were peaceful. The next morning brought clear skies and a difficult decision. Katherine's ankle, while not broken, was badly sprained. Cookie declared her unfit for walking, which meant she would need to ride in the wagon full time until it healed. "Slows us down," Frank said gruffly, though not unkindly. "Wagon can't keep pace with the herd if it's picking through the terrain careful-like." "I've been thinking about that," Rusty interjected. "There's a settlement about 2 days east of here, Cottonwood Springs. Small place, but they've got a doctor. I could take Mrs. Porter there, let her heal up proper, then catch up with the drive later." Frank considered this. 2 days there, 2 days back. Plus however long she needs to mend, that's a week at least. We need you here, Rusty. Pete can handle the men while I'm gone. He's been ready for more responsibility. Katherine, seated on a crate with her foot propped up, felt torn. "I don't want to be a burden." "Perhaps I could stay in the wagon, try to keep up, and risk making that injury permanent," Cookie interrupted. "No, madam, that ankle needs proper rest." Frank sighed, rubbing his whiskered chin. "All right, Rusty, take her to Cottonwood Springs. But I expect you back with us before we hit the North Fork crossing. That's 10 days from now." "We'll be there," Rusty promised. Within the hour, a wagon had been prepared for the journey. It was the smallest of the outfit's wagons, suitable for 2 people and supplies, but not much else. "It ain't fancy," Cookie said as he helped Katherine onto the seat, "but it'll get you there without jostling that ankle too much. I've packed enough food for a week, plus some of my special liniment for the pain." Katherine thanked him warmly, touched by the old cook's concern. The other cowboys came by to wish her well, many of them awkwardly tipping their hats or shuffling their feet, unaccustomed to showing gallantry to a lady in their rough trail life. As Rusty climbed up beside her and took the reins, Frank approached one last time. "Take care of her, Paxton. And watch your back. Blackburn's the type to hold a grudge." Rusty nodded grimly. "We'll be careful." With a flick of the reins, they were off, the wagon rolling eastward away from the cattle drive. Katherine felt a surprising pang of loss as she watched the camp recede in the distance. In just a few days, those men had become something like family to her, the first real sense of belonging she'd felt in years. "They're good men," Rusty said, seeming to read her thoughts. "Yes, they are." She turned to look at him. "Including their foreman." A hint of color touched his tan cheeks, and he kept his eyes fixed on the trail ahead. "Just doing what anyone would do." "No," Katherine said firmly. "Not anyone, not even most people. What you've done for me, I can never repay it." Rusty was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. Sometimes I think the war took something from me. The ability to see good in people, maybe, made me hard, cold. He glanced at her briefly. Helping you, it feels right. Like maybe I'm finding a piece of myself again. The raw honesty of his words touched Katherine deeply. I understand. After years with Vernon, I thought I'd forgotten how to hope, how to dream of something better. And now, she smiled, despite the ache in her ankle and the uncertainty of her future. Now I'm beginning to remember. They traveled through the day, stopping occasionally to rest the horses and stretch their limbs, or in Katherine's case, to keep her ankle elevated. The landscape changed gradually, the open prairie giving way to more varied terrain with copses of trees and small streams crisscrossing their path. As evening approached, Rusty found a sheltered spot near a creek to make camp. He helped Katherine down from the wagon with careful hands, supporting her weight as she hobbled to a flat area beneath a large cottonwood tree. It's beautiful here, she said, looking around at the peaceful setting. Water burbled over rocks in the creek bed, and birds called to each other from the trees. One of the things I love about this life, Rusty agreed as he unhitched the horses. You see places most folks never will. While he tended to the animals and gathered wood for a fire, Katherine set about preparing their supper from the supplies Cookie had packed. Despite her injured ankle, she managed to put together a simple but hearty meal of beans, bacon, and biscuits. They ate in companionable silence as twilight deepened around them. The first stars appeared overhead, brilliant points of light in the darkening sky. "Tell me about your life before," Rusty said suddenly, "if you don't mind talking about it." Katherine set down her tin plate, considering how much to share. "I grew up in St. Louis. My father was a school teacher, my mother a seamstress. We didn't have much, but we were happy." She smiled at the memory. "They died within months of each other when I was 18, influenza." "I'm sorry," Rusty said softly. "I had an aunt in Denver who took me in, but she was difficult. When Vernon Porter came through on business and showed interest in me, she practically pushed me into his arms. He seemed charming then, successful, promised me a good life in Colorado." Katherine sighed. "By the time I realized what kind of man he really was, we were already married and living in Willowbrook." "Did he hurt you?" Rusty's voice had a dangerous edge. Not physically, not often anyway. His weapons were words, neglect, humiliation. "And the gambling, always the gambling. Whatever money I earned, he lost at cards or on horses." She looked up at Rusty. "Until finally, he wagered me." Rusty's jaw tightened. "No man worthy of the name would do such a thing." "What about you?" Katherine asked, wanting to shift the conversation away from painful memories. "You mentioned the war. Were you in it long?" Rusty poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. 3 years. Enlisted in 62, fought until Appomattox, saw things no one should have to see." His voice grew distant. "Lost my brother at Gettysburg. We joined up together, promised our mother we'd look out for each other." "I'm so sorry," Katherine said, instinctively reaching out to touch his hand. He looked down at her fingers resting on his, then slowly turned his hand palm up, encompassing hers. The simple contact felt more intimate than any touch Katherine had experienced in years. "After the war, I couldn't go home," Rusty continued. "Too many ghosts." "Drifted west, found work with cattle, been doing it ever since. Do you ever think of settling somewhere?" she asked. A small smile touched his lips. "Sometimes, got a bit of money saved, enough to buy a small spread maybe, raise some horses." His thumb traced a small circle on her palm. "But a man needs more than land to make a home." The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but unmistakable. Katherine felt her heart quicken, both thrilled and frightened by the feelings growing between them. "It's getting late," she said finally, gently withdrawing her hand. "We should rest if we're to reach Cottonwood Springs tomorrow." Rusty nodded, understanding her need for space. "I'll make you a proper bed in the wagon. You'll be more comfortable there, and your ankle can stay elevated." He was as good as his word, arranging blankets in the bed of the wagon to create a soft pallet. After helping Katherine settle in, he made his own bedroll near the fire, close enough to protect her but far enough to maintain propriety. "Rusty," she called softly as he turned away. "Thank you." "For everything." He looked back, his face half in shadow. "Sleep well, Katherine." Despite her physical discomfort, Katherine fell asleep quickly, lulled by the night sounds and the sense of security Rusty's presence provided. Her dreams were a confusing mix of images: Vernon's angry face, Blackburn's cruel eyes, and then Rusty, standing between her and danger, solid as a mountain. She woke once in the night, startled by a sound she couldn't identify. Opening her eyes, she saw Rusty standing alert, his revolver drawn, scanning the darkness beyond their camp. After a tense moment, his shoulders relaxed, and he holstered his weapon. Just a deer or coyote, then, not the human threat they both feared might be following them. As he turned back toward his bedroll, the firelight caught his profile: strong jaw, straight nose, eyes that had seen too much sorrow. Katherine felt a tightness in her chest that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the man who had risked so much for a woman he barely knew. Morning brought clear skies and the promise of reaching Cottonwood Springs by nightfall. Rusty checked Katherine's ankle, noting with approval that the swelling had decreased somewhat. "Cookie's poultice seems to be working," he said. "Still, you'll need to see a proper doctor when we get to town." They made good time through the morning, the terrain growing more wooded as they traveled east. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horses near a small pond. While Rusty tended to the animals, Katherine prepared a cold lunch of bread, cheese, and dried apples. As they ate, Rusty kept glancing toward the way they had come, a slight frown creasing his brow. "What is it?" Katherine asked finally. "Probably nothing," he said, but his tone belied the casual words. "Thought I saw dust on the horizon earlier. Could be travelers. Could be someone following us." Katherine's heart skipped a beat. "Blackburn? Maybe, or just my imagination." Rusty stood, dusting off his pants. "Either way, we should keep moving. I know a shortcut that might throw off anyone tracking us." They packed up quickly, and Rusty guided the wagon off the main trail onto a narrower path that wound through a dense stand of pines. The going was slower, but offered better concealment. "How do you know these trails so well?" Katherine asked as they navigated a particularly tight turn. "Drove cattle through this region 3 times before. A good trail hand learns every water hole, every pass, every shortcut." He smiled briefly. "Never know when you'll need an alternative route." By late afternoon, they had emerged from the forest into rolling hills. In the distance, Katherine could make out thin wisps of smoke rising against the sky chimneys from Cottonwood Springs. "We'll be there within the hour," Rusty said, relief evident in his voice. But as they crested a hill, Rusty suddenly pulled the wagon to a halt, his expression hardening. "Trouble," he said quietly, nodding toward a point ahead where the trail dipped between 2 hills. Katherine squinted, making out the shapes of 3 riders positioned across the path, effectively blocking their way forward. "Blackburn?" she whispered, fear clutching at her throat. "Yes." "Him and 2 of his men." Rusty's hand moved to his revolver. "They must have ridden hard to get ahead of us." "What do we do?" Rusty assessed their situation quickly. "No way around without being seen. Can't go back, they'd just chase us down." His jaw set in a determined line. "We go forward." "I'll handle this." "But they're armed and there are 3 of them," Katherine protested. "So am I, and I've faced worse odds." He turned to look at her, his blue eyes intense. "Whatever happens, stay in the wagon. If things go badly, take the reins and head for Cottonwood Springs as fast as these horses can go. Ask for Marshal Wilson, he's a fair man, he'll help you." Before Katherine could argue further, Rusty flicked the reins, urging the horses forward. As they approached the waiting men, he slowed the wagon to a walk. Blackburn sat on a large black horse in the center of the trail, flanked by 2 rough-looking men Katherine recognized from the saloon in Willowbrook. All 3 had revolvers holstered at their waists. "Afternoon, Paxton," Blackburn called as they drew near. Fancy meeting you here. Blackburn, Rusty acknowledged coldly. You're a long way from Willowbrook. So is my property. Blackburn's gaze shifted to Katherine, a predatory smile spreading across his face. Mrs. Porter and I have unfinished business. The lady isn't property and she has no business with you, Rusty replied, his voice level but with an undercurrent of steel. Blackburn's smile faded. Her husband wagered her in a fair game. I won. The law recognizes gambling debts as valid. No law recognizes a human being as a poker chip, Rusty countered. Now, we're on our way to Cottonwood Springs. I suggest you step aside. One of Blackburn's men spat tobacco juice onto the ground. Boss, let's just take the woman and be done with it. This cowboy's outnumbered. Blackburn raised a hand, silencing his companion. I'm a reasonable man, Paxton. I'm willing to make you an offer. $500 for the woman. That's more than generous. Katherine felt sick at being discussed like livestock at auction. Beside her, she sensed Rusty's barely contained fury. She's not for sale, he said through clenched teeth. And she's not yours to claim. Now move aside or there will be trouble. Blackburn's expression hardened. I was hoping we could resolve this civilly, but I see you're determined to be difficult. He nodded to his men. Take her. Everything happened with startling speed. As Blackburn's men moved their horses forward, Rusty's hand flashed to his revolver. A shot cracked across the hillside, and one of Blackburn's men cried out, clutching his shoulder as his horse reared in panic. Next one won't be a warning, Rusty called, his revolver now aimed directly at Blackburn. The saloon owner's face contorted with rage. You've made a grave mistake, Paxton. His own hand moved toward his weapon. Katherine, acting on instinct, grabbed the shotgun Rusty had stowed beneath the wagon seat and raised it, aiming at Blackburn. I wouldn't, she said, surprised at the steadiness of her own voice. I may not be as good a shot as Mr. Paxton, but at this distance, I hardly need to be. Blackburn froze, clearly not having anticipated armed resistance from Katherine herself. His eyes darted between her resolute face and the shotgun's double barrels. This isn't over, he snarled after a tense moment. No woman is worth dying for. That's where you're wrong, Rusty replied quietly. Some are worth everything. The words sent a shiver through Katherine that had nothing to do with fear. Blackburn jerked his horse around. Come on, boys, we'll settle this another time. With a final venomous glare, he spurred his mount past the wagon, his remaining unhurt man following close behind. The wounded man struggled to control his horse, one-handed, but eventually managed to follow his companions. Only when the three riders had disappeared over the hill did Katherine lower the shotgun, her hands suddenly trembling. Are you all right? Rusty asked, taking the weapon gently from her grasp. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The confrontation had lasted only minutes, but it had felt like hours. You were brave, he said, his voice warm with admiration. Not many would have the presence of mind to do what you did. I was terrified, she admitted, but I couldn't let him hurt you. Their eyes met, something unspoken passing between them. Then Rusty cleared his throat and turned his attention back to the road ahead. We should get to town before dark. Blackburn might have more men waiting around. The rest of the journey passed in tense silence, both of them watching for signs of further ambush. But they reached the outskirts of Cottonwood Springs without incident as the sun was beginning to set. The settlement was larger than Katherine had expected, not quite a proper town, but more than just a trading post. A main street lined with wooden buildings stretched before them, a church steeple visible at the far end. People moved about on boardwalks, and the warm glow of lamplight spilled from windows as dusk deepened. Rusty guided the wagon toward a 2-story building with a sign proclaiming it the Cottonwood Hotel. We'll get rooms here, he said. Doctor's office is just down the street. We can see him in the morning. The hotel proprietor, a plump woman named Mrs. Jenkins, clucked sympathetically over Katherine's injured ankle and insisted on having her husband carry Katherine upstairs to a small but clean room. Rusty took an adjoining room, arranging with Mrs. Jenkins to have hot water brought up for Katherine to bathe. "I'll see about getting us some supper," he told Katherine before leaving her to her ablutions. "Rest that ankle. I'll be back soon." The luxury of a proper bath after days on the trail was almost overwhelming. Katherine sank into the steaming water with a sigh of pure pleasure, feeling the dust and tension of the journey melt away. She washed her hair thoroughly, grateful for the small cake of lavender soap Mrs. Jenkins had provided. By the time Rusty knocked on her door, she was dressed in her spare dress, the only other one she had packed in her hasty flight from Willowbrook, with her damp hair hanging loose down her back. "Come in," she called, seated on the edge of the bed with her ankle propped on a pillow. Rusty entered, carrying a tray laden with food. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of her with her hair down, then he quickly averted his gaze, a hint of color touching his cheeks. "Mrs. Jenkins sent up stew, bread, and apple pie," he said, setting the tray on the small table beside the window. "She says the doctor will come here in the morning to look at your ankle so you don't have to walk." "That's very kind of her," Katherine smiled, touched by his continued thoughtfulness. "Will you join me? There's plenty for both of us." They ate together, the simple meal tasting like a feast after trail cooking. As they finished, Katherine found herself studying Rusty's face in the soft lamplight. Without the dust of the trail and with his hair still damp from his own washing up, he looked younger, less weathered. A handsome man, she realized with a small jolt of surprise. Not in the flashy way Vernon had been handsome, but in a deeper, more substantial way. "What will you do after Cottonwood Springs?" Rusty asked, breaking into her thoughts. Katherine set down her fork, considering. "I'm not sure. I have a little money saved. Enough to take the stage somewhere farther east, perhaps, find work as a cook or housekeeper. And if Blackburn follows," she hadn't allowed herself to think that far ahead. "I don't know, keep running, I suppose." Rusty was silent for a moment, seeming to wrestle with some internal debate. "There's another option," he said finally. "What's that?" "Come with me." The words came out in a rush. "Back to the cattle drive, then north to the railhead. I know the trail boss at another outfit heading to California after this drive. He'd take us both on." "California?" Katherine's eyes widened. "That's so far." "Far from Blackburn, far from Vernon, a place to start fresh." Rusty leaned forward, his eyes intent on hers. "I know we've only known each other a short time, Katherine, but I feel it too," she whispered, her heart pounding. Rusty reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "I can't offer you much, not yet, but I promise you this: you'd never be a wager, never be owned. You'd be your own woman always." Tears pricked at Katherine's eyes. "And would I be alone in California?" His fingers tightened around hers. "Not if you didn't want to be." The unspoken question hung between them. Katherine knew what he was offering: not just protection, not just escape, but a future, together. "I need time," she said softly, "to think, to be sure." Rusty nodded, gently releasing her hand. "Of course, there's no hurry." He stood, gathering the empty dishes onto the tray. "Get some rest. We'll talk more after the doctor sees you tomorrow." At the door, he paused, looking back at her. "Whatever you decide, Katherine, know that meeting you has changed something in me, something I thought was lost for good." After he left, Katherine lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of her tumbling emotions. Just a week ago, she had been Katherine Porter, unhappy wife and barmaid. Now she was. What? A runaway, a woman being pursued. Or perhaps, most surprisingly, a woman being courted by a man unlike any she had known before. Sleep came fitfully. Her dreams a confused jumble of images: Vernon's angry face, Blackburn's cold eyes, and always, Rusty standing between her and danger, solid as a mountain. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sounds of the town coming to life outside. A knock at the door heralded Mrs. Jenkins with a breakfast tray and news that the doctor would arrive within the hour. Doctor. Marshall proved to be a kindly older man with gentle hands and a reassuring manner. He examined Catherine's ankle thoroughly, nodding with approval at the treatment it had already received. "A bad sprain, but healing well," he pronounced. "Another week of rest, and you'll be good as new. Though I'd recommend avoiding cattle stampedes in the future, young lady." Katherine laughed, liking him immediately. "I'll certainly try, doctor." After he left, prescribing continued rest and a special liniment, Rusty came to check on her. He looked rested, his blue eyes clear and bright in the morning light. "Good news from the doctor?" "Yes, he says I'm healing nicely, just need to rest it a bit longer." Katherine hesitated, then plunged ahead. "Rusty, about what you said last night." A commotion in the street below interrupted her. Shouts and the pounding of hooves drew Rusty to the window. His expression darkened as he looked out. "What is it?" Katherine asked, alarmed by his sudden change in demeanor. "Blackburn. He's back, with more men this time." Rusty moved quickly to the door. "Stay here. Lock the door behind me." "Where are you going?" Fear clutched at Catherine's heart. "To find the marshal. If Blackburn wants a fight, he'll get one, but on legal terms this time." Rusty paused, his hand on the doorknob. "Katherine, whatever happens, remember what I said. You're no one's wager. You're your own woman." Before she could respond, he was gone. Katherine limped to the door, locking it as instructed, then moved to the window to see what was happening below. Blackburn sat on his black horse in the middle of the street, 5 men flanking him. They had drawn a small crowd of curious townspeople who kept a wary distance. As Katherine watched, Rusty emerged from the hotel and strode into the street, his stance confident despite being outnumbered. She couldn't hear what was being said, but the confrontational postures of both men told their own story. After a tense exchange, another man joined them taller than both, wearing a marshal's star on his chest. More words were exchanged, the marshal's expression growing increasingly stern as he addressed Blackburn. To Catherine's surprise, Blackburn eventually nodded grudgingly and dismounted. He, Rusty, and the marshal disappeared into a building across the street that she assumed was the marshal's office. An agonizing hour passed before Rusty returned to her room, his expression a mixture of relief and lingering anger. "It's over," he said as she let him in. "Blackburn's leaving town." Just like that. Katherine couldn't believe it had been resolved so easily. Rusty's mouth quirked in a grim smile. "Not exactly. Marshal Wilson's an old friend from the war. When I explained the situation, he was, let's say, not sympathetic to Blackburn's claim. Reminded him that attempting to enforce ownership of another human being hasn't been legal since '65. And Blackburn accepted that. He didn't have much choice. Turns out he's wanted in Wyoming for running a crooked gambling operation. Marshal gave him a choice: leave you alone and leave town by sundown, or face arrest and extradition." Rusty's smile widened slightly. He chose the former. Relief washed over Katherine in a dizzying wave. "So it's really over, I'm free and clear." "Vernon has no legal claim on you either, not after what he did. Marshal Wilson will be sending a telegram to the county sheriff in Willowbrook, informing him of the situation." Katherine sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the sudden lifting of the shadow that had hung over her for days. "I hardly know what to say, how to thank you." Rusty sat beside her, taking her hands in his. "There's something else, something I need to tell you before you make any decisions about your future." The seriousness in his tone made her heart skip a beat. "What is it?" "I haven't been entirely honest with you." He took a deep breath. "My name is Rusty Paxton, but I'm not just a cattle drive foreman. My family owns the Rocking Pea Ranch in Montana Territory, 20,000 acres, 5,000 head of cattle. I came south to oversee this drive because after the war, I needed to remember what it felt like to work with my hands, to earn my way without the Paxton name opening doors." Katherine stared at him in astonishment. "You're a rancher, a landowner?" "My father built the ranch from nothing. When he died 2 years ago, it passed to me and my mother. She runs things while I'm away, with the help of good managers." His eyes held her steadily. I'm telling you this not to impress you, Katherine, but because I want you to know the truth before I ask what I'm about to ask. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must hear it. And what are you about to ask? Rusty slid from the bed to one knee before her, still holding her hands in his. Katherine Porter, I know we've known each other only a short time. But in that time, I've seen your courage, your strength, your kindness. I've seen the woman you truly are, and that woman has claimed my heart completely. His blue eyes were earnest, vulnerable in a way she had never seen them. I'm asking you to come to Montana, not as someone fleeing the past, but as someone embracing a future. With me, as my wife, if you'll have me. Katherine's breath caught in her throat. A week ago, she had been a woman with no choices, no freedom, no future beyond the next day's drudgery. Now a man she had come to admire, to love, though she had scarcely admitted it even to herself, was offering her not just escape, but a life, a partnership. Rusty, she began, her voice trembling with emotion. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it, he replied gently. I'm not asking for an answer this moment. Take all the time you need. But Katherine found she didn't need time. In the crucible of danger and shared hardship, something rare and precious had formed between them, a bond of trust, of mutual respect, of deepening affection that she now recognized as love in its truest form. Yes, she said simply. Rusty blinked, as if not quite believing what he'd heard. Yes. A laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep inside her, a sound of pure joy that surprised them both. Yes, Russell Paxton, I will go to Montana with you. I will be your wife. I will share your future. His face transformed with happiness, years seeming to fall away as he gathered her into his arms. When his lips met hers, Katherine felt as though she had finally, after years of wandering, found her way home. 3 days later, they were married in the small church at the end of Cottonwood Springs Main Street. Katherine wore a new dress of blue silk that Rusty had insisted on buying for her from the town's only dressmaker. Mrs. Jenkins had fashioned a simple bouquet of wildflowers and ribbons, and the doctor attended as witness alongside the marshal. It was not the grand wedding Katherine had once dreamed of as a girl, but as she spoke her vows to the man standing tall and proud beside her, she knew it was perfect in every way that mattered. That evening, as she stood beside her new husband on the hotel balcony, watching the sun set over the distant mountains, Katherine marveled at the strange turns her life had taken. What are you thinking? Rusty asked, his arm warm around her waist. That sometimes the worst moment of your life can lead to the best, she replied, leaning into his embrace. If Vernon hadn't wagered me in that poker game, I would have found you anyway, Rusty said with conviction. Some things are meant to be. Katherine Paxton, Katherine Paxton. Her new name, her new life. She turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to touch his cheek tenderly. I believe you're right, husband. His smile was like sunrise breaking over the prairie. I told you that first day, and I meant it. You're no one's wager. You're my forever. As his lips met hers in a kiss that promised a lifetime of tomorrows, Katherine knew she had found not just safety, not just freedom, but the rarest treasure of all, a love that would endure through whatever challenges life might bring. The journey to Montana took them 3 weeks, following the completion of the cattle drive. They traveled by train and stagecoach, the landscape changing dramatically as they moved northward. Katherine watched in wonder as plains gave way to foothills, and finally to the majestic mountains of Montana Territory. When they crested the final rise, and the rocking P came into view, Katherine gasped at the sight spread before her. A sprawling ranch house of weathered wood and stone nestled in a valley of breathtaking beauty. Outbuildings, corrals, and barns formed a small settlement around it, while in the distance, cattle grazed on endless acres of lush grass. It's beautiful, she whispered, gripping Rusty's hand. Welcome home, Mrs. Paxton, he replied, his voice rich with pride and love. A woman emerged from the main house as their wagon approached, tall and straight-backed despite her 60 years, with Rusty's same blue eyes and determined chin. Eleanor Paxton welcomed her new daughter-in-law with open arms and genuine warmth, clearly delighted that her son had finally brought home a bride. "He told me in his telegram that you were beautiful and brave," Eleanor said, as she showed Katherine around the spacious house. He didn't exaggerate on either count. In the weeks that followed, Katherine threw herself into learning the rhythms of ranch life. She discovered a natural aptitude for managing the household, organizing supplies, and even keeping the ranch's accounts skills she hadn't known she possessed. The kitchen became her domain, and soon the ranch hands were singing the praises of Mrs. Paxton's cooking. Rusty watched her flourish with a joy that sometimes overwhelmed him. At night, in the privacy of their bedroom, he showed her the depth of his love in ways that left them both breathless and wonderstruck. Katherine, who had known only Vernon's selfish demands, discovered the beauty of physical love freely given and received. "I never knew it could be like this," she confessed one night, nestled against his chest as moonlight spilled through their window. "Like what?" he murmured into her hair, so complete, as if we're truly one person in those moments. His arms tightened around her. "That's because we are, in all the ways that matter." Summer gave way to autumn, and as the aspen trees turned gold against the evergreens, Katherine made an announcement that brought tears of joy to Rusty's eyes. "A baby," he whispered, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "Our child." "Due in early May, the doctor thinks." Katherine covered his hand with hers. "I hope it's a boy with your eyes." "I hope it's a girl with your spirit," he countered, kissing her tenderly. As winter settled over the rocking P, bringing deep snows and cozy evenings by the fire, Katherine often reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this place of contentment and love. From a barmaid wagered in a poker game to the cherished wife of a Montana rancher, expecting their first child life had a way of surprising even in its darkest moments. One snowy evening, as they sat before the fire in their comfortable parlor, Eleanor reminiscing about Rusty's childhood while Katherine worked on a tiny blanket for the coming baby. A knock came at the door. Rusty answered it to find a trail-worn man he didn't recognize, hat in hand, looking apologetic for disturbing them so late. "Mr. Paxton?" the stranger inquired. "Russell Paxton." "That's me," Rusty confirmed, guard up slightly. "What can I do for you?" "Name's Jenkins, sir." "Marshall Wilson from Cottonwood Springs sent me. Got a message for you and your wife." Katherine joined them at the door, alarmed by the mention of Cottonwood Springs. "Has something happened?" The messenger handed Rusty a sealed envelope. "Marshall said it wasn't urgent but thought you'd want to know." Rusty thanked the man, invited him to stay the night given the weather, and then opened the letter as they returned to the parlor. His expression changed as he read, from concern to something like grim satisfaction. "What is it?" Katherine asked. Rusty handed her the letter. "News from Willowbrook." The marshal's neat handwriting informed them that Charles Blackburn had been arrested and convicted for running a crooked gambling operation. He would spend the next 10 years in prison. As for Vernon Porter, he had been found dead in an alley behind the Silver Star Saloon, apparently having angered the wrong card player with his cheating ways. Katherine folded the letter slowly, a complex mixture of emotions washing over her. No grief for the man who had treated her so callously, but a certain melancholy for the young woman she had once been, who had believed in Vernon's false promises. "Are you all right?" Rusty asked gently, sitting beside her. Katherine nodded, placing a hand over the small swell of her stomach where their child grew. "Yes, it feels like the final page of an old book closing. Now we can write our own story, without shadows from the past." Rusty gathered her close, his strong arms a shelter she had never known she needed until she found it. "We've already started," he murmured against her hair, "and it's going to be the finest story ever told." In the years that followed, the Rocking P thrived under their joint stewardship. Their son, James, was born on a perfect spring morning, followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Rose, after the kind cook who had helped Katherine escape Willowbrook. As the children grew, so did the ranch, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. Katherine never forgot where she had come from or how close she had come to a life of servitude. She opened her home to women in need, offering shelter and a fresh start to those fleeing difficult circumstances. With Rusty's full support, she even established a small fund to help such women begin independent lives. On their 10th anniversary, Rusty presented Katherine with a gift, a small silver locket engraved with the words he had spoken to her on that dusty trail so many years before. "You're no one's wager. You're my forever." As she fastened it around her neck, Katherine looked up at the man who had rescued her in more ways than one, the man who had shown her what true partnership and love could be. "Forever," she agreed, standing on tiptoe to kiss him as the Montana sunset painted the sky in hues of gold and crimson. "And that still doesn't seem long enough,"